Can Satan physically harm a believer? Does God allow Satan to physically harm a believer? And can God manifest his presence to us? Those are the questions that I'm going to be answering, so stick around. Hey guys, I'm Mackenzie from A Cup of Life. I'm super excited to have you guys here. This is part 3 of a 4-part series all about my experience with gold dust and all of the studying and just really looking into scripture to see what scripture says. If you haven't already, click that subscribe button and hit the bell so you don't miss any more videos from me. What do you guys even think about those questions? Do you think Satan can physically harm us and that God allows it? Or can God manifest his presence to us? Leave me your answer down in the comments below. So after I posted my first video about my experience with gold dust, I had 2 complete opposite ends of the spectrum of people telling me it's from Satan or it's from God. So which one is it? My thought process was, okay, if it's from Satan, that means that there is something physically on me meant to bring harm, and therefore that means that Satan can physically harm me as a believer. Or it's from God and it's him manifesting his presence in a tangible way to us. What I've discovered is, yes, Satan can physically harm a believer, but it's only when God allows it to happen. We're going to be looking at 3 different places in scripture that talk about believers being physically harmed by Satan and how God allowed that to happen. But first, I want to make sure that you realize that when God allows these things to happen to us, it's never more than what we can handle. 1 Corinthians 10:13, it says, "No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can endure it." I love this verse. This has brought me so much comfort just over the years, not just with this topic, but lots of other things that have come up in my life. So yes, Satan can physically harm us as a believer, but it's never going to be more than what God knows that we can bear, and he's going to provide comfort during that time. So I think one of the best examples in the Bible of when Satan physically harmed someone, even though it wasn't harming the person, not their body, but things and people around them. Job, if you've ever heard of Job, the entire book is just a very sad story of all of these awful things that happened to Job. Just a couple of things that happened. His children were killed. His property was destroyed. His livelihood was stolen. His servants were killed, and he suffered from boils. All of these different things that Satan was behind all of it. So I want to take just a little look in here. This is Job 1, verses 1 through 13, or I don't know if I read the whole thing, but we're going to kind of get an idea of what's going on. One day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. The Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered the Lord, "From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." "Does Job fear God for nothing?" Satan replied. "Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." The Lord said to Satan, "Very well, then. Everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger." As we're learning, Job was a man of God. He was upright and righteous, and all of these awful things happened to him. And it's just kind of like one thing after the other, after the other, after the other. And it even says here, God gave Satan permission to cause harm to Job and the life around Job. This is Job 2, verse 7. And it says, "So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and afflicted Job with painful sores from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. Then Job took a piece of broken pottery and scraped himself with it as he sat among the ashes. His wife said to him, "Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die." He replied, "You are walking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" In all this, Job did not sin in what he said. So I read a little farther. Sorry, I went to verse 10. This is just one of the many things that was about to come for Job in this story. I just think it's really cool how Job reacts to the different things that are happening to him. So go read Job. It's an awesome book. Another place where it talks about a believer being physically harmed by Satan is in Luke chapter 13. It's talking about a crippled woman, and it is specific in saying that she's not possessed, but she's being like physically ailed by like not being able to walk. So it tells us, one, that the woman was a daughter of Abraham, meaning that she is a believer, okay? And it also talks about how Satan was the one that was keeping her bound for 18 years. So that's just another example where Satan was physically harming a believer and God was letting it happen, but it wasn't more than the woman could bear, and she ended up getting healed in the end, which is really cool. A third place in the Bible where it talks about how Satan can physically harm a believer is in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. I'm going to read just the first part of it. This is talking about Paul, and he has a thorn in him, and just the way that he reacts to it, Paul just continually blows my mind. So if you haven't ever watched, I have made a couple videos about Paul, so I will post the links right up above here if you want to check them out. But this was a place, man, like he was literally given a thorn in his flesh, and he says it was a messenger from Satan, and it was meant to torment him, to cause him harm. And he pleaded with God 3 times to take it away. And God told him that my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Beautiful symbolism there. Absolutely just love that right there. So I just want to just really put an emphasis on the fact, 2 facts really. One, that God is never going to give you more than what you can handle. And if you think you can't handle it, then you're believing a lie, because the Bible tells us that God doesn't give us anything that we can't handle, and that his grace is sufficient. So just be encouraged in that. And the second thing is that when Satan physically harms a believer, God gets all of the glory for it. Like if you noticed with Job, like every time that Job was physically harmed or hurt by Satan, he turned it right back around on God and gave God all of the glory for it. And with the woman, the same thing. It talked about how she was healed, and then she praised God for that healing, even though she had been crippled for, 17 or 18 years, like a very, very long time. She turned it right back around. And the same thing here with Job, that it says, "That is why for Christ's sake I delight in my weaknesses and insults and hardships and persecutions and difficulties, for when I am weak, then I am strong." And he's talking about how, "Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me." So when I'm testing what I experienced against these scriptures, there was a time in there, and I talked about this in the first video, where I felt very depressed and very discouraged from the way that people reacted, which, those were my own feelings that were getting in the way. But I do wonder, okay, so was that the season of where the harm was coming in? But at the same time, that doesn't really completely line up with this, because if you're looking at each of these places, the physical part of it is what was causing the harm. So if I look at it and say, the gold dust hurt me, that doesn't make sense to me, because I wasn't being physically harmed by the gold dust that was on me. It was the events that happened afterwards, and the way that people reacted, and the way that I let my emotions get caught up in that. So that doesn't completely line up for me. I'm not going to completely rule out and say that it wasn't Satan, because it could have been. And that's why it's important to test these things that happen to us against Scripture. But I'm also not going to rule out and say that it wasn't God, because I feel like that has the exact same consequences. Because either we jump and say that it's from God, and if it's not from Him, then we're being deceived. And then if we go ahead and say that it's from Satan, but it's really from God, well, that's like one of the biggest sins that you can ever commit, where you're giving Satan credit for something that God's doing. So that's why it's just like, we can't jump at these things and just automatically assume who it's from. Jumping off of all of that, kind of like the last question that I had, and I'm still learning about it. And so I'm not really prepared to make like a whole video about it. I'm hoping to in the future once I find some more clarity. But one of the biggest questions was, okay, can God manifest His presence to us here on earth? It is very controversial, and I understand that. And it's not something that I grew up even like, I had never heard of that before. But now as I'm getting older and I'm learning more about my faith and like who God is, that question has become very, very relevant, especially after the things that I've seen and experienced in the last couple of years of my life. Like, you know, I can't deny what's happened to me. And so I am doing a lot of research and just looking through the Bible to find like, okay, is this biblical? So I did find a part in the Bible. It's in Exodus, talking about Moses. And I actually filmed this for last week's video, so whenever I actually put this up on the screen, I'm going to be in a different outfit because I decided to save it for this week. I felt like it fit better. But it's just one example in the Bible that talks about God's presence being manifested. And it's not super black and white. It is kind of gray to some people. I mean, I feel like to me it's a little bit more black and white, but it wasn't always that way. So I'm going to go ahead and put that up, and then we'll finish up after that. This is one of my absolute favorite passages that I don't know how I ever missed it, because it's absolutely just a beautiful passage. So I'm going to read it for you, then we're going to talk about it. This is Exodus 34, verse 29, and going through the rest of the chapter. It's titled The Radiant Face of Moses. When Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of the covenant law in his hands, he was not aware that his face was radiant, because he had spoken with the Lord. When Aaron and all the Israelites saw Moses, his face was radiant, and they were afraid to come near him. But Moses called to them. So Aaron and all the leaders of the community came back to him, and he spoke to them. Afterward, all the Israelites came near to him, and he gave them all the commands the Lord had given him on Mount Sinai. When Moses finished speaking to them, he put a veil over his face. But whenever he entered the Lord's presence to speak with him, he removed the veil until he came out. And when he came out and told the Israelites what he had been commanded, they saw that his face was radiant. Then Moses would put the veil back over his face until he went in to speak with the Lord. This whole little passage here, that is completely in the character of God, of what happened to me. It's slightly different because I want you to remember that this is the Old Covenant law, where only like certain people were selected, like the prophets, that could speak with God and could have like a relationship with him, and everyone else was just getting information like from those prophets. So that's why it's slightly different than what happened to me. I'm not at all saying that I'm a prophet, so just that's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that we're in the new covenant, and so for that reason, people that were seeing the presence and the glory of God on me, they were not afraid, because they're in relationship with God, and we're allowed to be in relationship with him because we're in the new covenant. So I just want to make that distinction because it is different. But like just the description there, this whole part, guys, man, this just like, it chokes me up a little bit. And when he came out and told the Israelites what he had been commanded, they saw that his face was radiant. Like it was so overwhelming to them, which is exactly how people were explaining it to me. And connecting my experience with this scripture right here tells me that 100% what happened to me was in the character of God and what he's already done. It doesn't spell it out for us. What it does is it tells us that Moses, someone who was very close with God, when he spent time with him, he had this radiant presence on him, and that other people could like see it and feel it. And I think that that is just amazing. So I hope to make some videos in the future about more of what I find of God being able to manifest his presence and how he's done that in scripture. So I'm going to keep doing some more research and all of that. So stay tuned for that. But I can't lie. The thought crossed my mind, what if this is from Satan? And what if I really am being deceived? Until this happened to me again. And this time, it went a lot differently when I approached it with a different heart. So that's what I want to share in the next video. Kind of like I've caught you guys up to about like July, the beginning of July. So the past 2 months, what has been happening through all of this that I have discovered in the Bible through scripture and reading and everything. So if you haven't, make sure that you click the subscribe button and the bell so that you get notified when I post that video next week. If you haven't watched the other videos in this series, I'm going to leave a link right here as well as down below. So go watch those. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you have a great week and make sure that you overflow Jesus.